Hello, I'm Beth Joey and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, welcome. This is a channel where I paint my face, turn my camera on and talk about some books. I am in a reading slump. And it's killing me because I had such a good start to the year that I was like, yes, this is gonna be my year of reading. I'm gonna read like 200 books. It's gonna be amazing. And it's already like end of April. Right in that last week of April, everything that I was reading, I either didn't like or it was a reread and I enjoyed it because I knew that I'd enjoyed it. So nothing was really surprising me or anything. It was all just a bit meh. So now I'm doing what I can to get myself out of this slump. And for me, that might be a bit of anticipation hesitation. If you don't know what this series is about, I essentially wrapped up 12 books at the beginning of the year in Christmas wrapping paper, whatever I had left over. 6 books that I am anticipating and 6 books that I am hesitating towards. I think so far I've had 2 hesitations in my first video and 1 of each in my second. The 2 books in the first video, I loved one of them and hated the other. So go hesitation for making me fall in love with The Lost Apothecary. And then in the second video, I think I loved my anticipation and DNF'd my hesitation. So we're starting at a sort of interesting place in which I guess we're kind of tying with these videos. Every single one, I've liked one, hated another. So I'm hoping this time we can get 2 smash outs. So let's get straight into unwrapping the first book. So I'm thinking I'll go 1 short book, 1 long book. And this is like my long book pile, completely accidentally. It just so happened that all my long books ended up in white wrapping paper. So let's go for this one on the bottom because that one looks the longest. Let's unwrap this and see whether it's an anticipation or a hesitation, and hopefully we'll end up loving it. What have we got? Oh no. Oh god, okay, I can't remember if this is an anticipation or a hesitation, but I'm pretty sure it's a hesitation. Okay, so this is actually an anticipation book, and I don't know why, because it's huge, and I've only read 1 book by this author, and that was The Priory of the Orange Tree, and I had a so-so experience with it. Like, I thought it was way too long, and I'm not even gonna touch Day of Fallen Night. So this is apparently anticipation. It's the bone season, but it's also got the novella of the book right before that in it, which is called The Pale Dreamer. So it's kind of reading like 2.5 books in one, but as for what it's about, it says, for the past 200 years, the Scion government has led an oppressive campaign against unnaturalness in London. Clairvoyance in all its forms has been decreed a criminal offense, and those who practice it viciously punished. Forced underground, a clairvoyant underworld has developed, combating persecution and evading capture. Paige Mahoney, a powerful dreamwalker operating in the Seven Dials district of London, leads a double life, using her unnaturalness illegally while hiding her gift from her father, who works for the Scion Regiment. I am supposed to be anticipating this book, but I think that's because I've heard so many people talk about it and so many people love it, so that makes me think I'm gonna love it, but I also have no idea. So this is the first book. Because that's gonna be such a beast, let's go for like a baby short one from my other pile. So I'm thinking this top one is probably the shortest, so let's unwrap her and see what we get. Hopefully something like really easy and simple, and oh, you know what? I'm happy with this. I think this is 2 anticipation reads. We've got The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels. This is a Regency era romance, I believe, supposed to be kind of Bridgerton-esque, or for fans of Bridgerton. Maybe that's just because it's a romance and it's Regency era. Maybe there's nothing else that links them. But as for what it's about, it says, Cecilia Bassingthwaighte belongs to a very prestigious circle of women, the Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels. Yet this is no ordinary Victorian lady society. These women spend their days pickpocketing and blackmailing their way around the country, all before it's time to sit down for tea. But when Cecilia meets Ned Lightbourne, her world is set to change forever, because he's a paid assassin and she's his next hit. Under the employment of the dastardly Captain Morvath, who wants to rid the world of these lady scoundrels, Ned knows he has one job to do. But when he lays his eyes on the feisty, beautiful Cecilia, he's faced with a conundrum. Does he kill her or fall in love with her? Bridgerton meets Peaky Blinders in this swashbuckling tale of scoundrels in society, crime and crumpets, as these enemies turn to allies and might just fall in love along the way. I am so glad that this is one of the reads because I have been so waiting to pick this one up. I saw the 3rd book in Waterstones and didn't have the 2nd book with me, so I was like, okay, if I love this, I will go to Waterstones and I will buy them both and screw my book buying ban, because let's be honest, I gave up on that at the start of the year. But anyway, these are the 2 books I'm going to be reading this week. Both are anticipations, but this one is definitely like teetering on the edge of anticipation and hesitation. So I think I'm going to go with, let's be honest, whichever one I have an audiobook for. So let's look that up real quick. think I'm gonna read this one first. I don't have audiobooks for either of these, which is gonna make this an even more challenging experience for me because this is a big one. So if I don't love it, it's gonna feel like a slog and it's gonna take me ages. But this one I know will be quick. So I'm gonna read this one first. Oh my God, the pages are like Bible pages. Okay, so this is gonna be longer than expected. It's 321 pages, that's not too bad. So read this one first and I'll let you know my thoughts in a little bit. Right, we are back. It is time to talk about my reads now that I've read both of the books for Anticipation and Hesitation. Just as a reminder, these are both anticipation reads, so that's usually a pretty good sign that I'm gonna like them, but also one of these really, really terrified me. But let's go and talk about the book that I read first, which was The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was so good, so entertaining. From the very first chapter, I think I was just baffled by this read because of just how random it was. You'd have moments where someone's breaking into these women's house, they've just smashed a window, they're about to assassinate them, and these women are sitting down for tea, super excited that an assassination attempt has come out on them. It's like a rite of passage, and they're talking about the etiquette of the guy that's robbing them, and they're like, oh, you should have come in through the front door, like why are you coming in through the window? It's such a draft, and all these sorts of things. It's just such a weird like situation where the context of the danger that they're in doesn't match the language of that the characters are using, but in the best possible way. Let's go into a bit more detail though about my review. So let's talk about Corpile as we always do. Let's talk about characters. These characters were so strange in the best way. The way they toe the line between Victorian propriety and then also being pirates, being scoundrels was just really entertaining. The way that those two lives juxtapose each other so wholly, and it just made it really comedic. I even love the fact that like robbing a bank or having an assassination attempt put on your life or a hit put on you was like a rite of passage in this world for these women. And I also, of course, the feminist in me loved that these women viewed men as sort of incompetent. It was very, very much the, you know, the women are in control of the ships, they're in power, they're in charge of this society, and then men, a lot of the men in this book were positioned as just sort of blubbering idiots, including the big bad, the villain. He was clearly a misogynist, clearly a douchebag, and the way he was written and the way his whole history and his parentage and everything was told just made him look like a blubbering idiot, and it was just so good. As for the main character, Cecilia, she exemplified a lot of the traits that you'd expect of a Victorian woman, you know, decorum, loyalty, commitment to family, her approach to scandal, romance, and all the rules and everything around that. But I like how being a pirate challenged a lot of that sort of thing, and then her relationship in this story as it developed definitely challenged her belief of, you know, what is expected of her in this Victorian society, but then what does she want to do? And I love the way she grew through that and decided sort of at the end that she was going to go down her own path rather than sort of living within the constraints of the society that she was raised in. Ned, the main male character, was an absolute sap, definitely Guy Fawkes first. He was pursuing her for the entire length of the story, which was great to see. I love it when that happens. And as for the side characters, there was Aunt Darlington, whose hypochondria, mad hypochondria, was just an absolute giggle moment sometimes, and obviously the big bad was as well because he was positioned as a blubbering idiot. As for atmosphere, the vibes in this story were immaculate, be it romance, be it the atmosphere of propriety and decorum mixed with that sort of pirate life atmosphere of, you know, roguishness and scandal. I will say that the romance was a little confusing at times because I was so distracted by everything else, like all the adventure and the pirate and the language, that it took me a while to realize that there was also a romance happening. But I think once I realized that it was happening, it was amazing, and it was just super cinnamon bun vibes. As for writing, I mean, need I say it again, it was so comedic in the way that it would use the propriety and that Victorian woman lifestyle to contradict the sort of pirate lifestyle. The way those two elements would interact just made the whole thing so comedic because they would speak in this really, really proper and formal way, but then they'd talk about robbing banks, and it was so comedic. Plus, I loved how some of the women used their sort of perceived weakness as a tool. So the men perceived them to be weak and unable to look after themselves, and they would position that and manipulate that so that they would run with it. They would appear weak, but then use that to gather information or go and, you know, scout out something because they knew that the people that they were around would underestimate them. As for plot, I think this is where my rating started to go down a little bit because I don't think elements of the plot felt as smooth as other elements. So for example, that sort of juxtaposition between propriety and pirate lifestyle was really, really clear, and the growth growth of all the characters was really, really clear, and the plot of, you know, the adventure and stealing back these houses and this sort of big pirate battle thing was really, really clear, but the romance wasn't as clear because I was distracted by a lot of the other elements, and the main guy was sort of confusing and that he had a lot of identities, so you had a lot to like play around with. The adventure plotline I wouldn't say was anything majorly complicated or groundbreaking. I like how the characters were a bit more this is a character point, but I like how the characters were a bit complex, and the definition of bad was kind of subjective based on the situation, but the way that was explored through the plot, so you knew sort of who the good guy was, who the bad guy was, and the motivations behind everything was really, really great. But yeah, that romance unfortunately was a little bit of a downer for me because I expected that to be like the main thread, and I was definitely distracted by everything else rather than that being the main thread. And intrigue as well is one place where I really suffered because it took me way, way longer to read this book than it should have. I think I started it on the 1st of May and I finished it on the 6th, so that's a really, really long time for a 321 page book. And that was just because I think the language is really, whilst really, really comedic and entertaining, it is very grand, very formal, very Victorian, so it's a lot to wrap your mind around, and it's when you dive into this book you really have to dive in head first. You can't be distracted while reading it, so that meant that the motivation to read it wasn't like an easy read in the same way that some others are, so the motivation to keep coming back to it when I was just coming out of a reading slump was a little bit harder, so my intrigue was a bit lower. As for logic, there was no logic to this book at all, but in the best possible way, which I love. And as for enjoyment, yeah, I really, really did enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars. I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in just a really sort of almost witchy, like I think it's magical realism, I guess, element to a Victorian pirate style story. It's fascinating. And then we have the second book, which is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, and by extension The Pale Dreamer, because that's in this book as well. I gave both of those books 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed jumping into this series. I was super, super skeptical about it, super, super scared to pick this up because it's a beefy book, because I know it's really well liked, and because the only Samantha Shannon experience that I've had before was The Priory of the Orange Tree, which, don't get me wrong, was amazing, but I was really just overwhelmed by it. It was too long, it was too drawn out, and I struggled through it. But this one I think was really good. Briefly for my thoughts on The Pale Dreamer, just quickly, I thought it was a really, really great setup to the story. I think it isolated all the characters really clearly. It set up how the main character, who we then follow, came to be a part of this world. It set up her backstory in a really clear way, which I liked, and it introduced characters that would then become more nuanced in the next book, which made them more interesting in the next book because I knew where they'd come from. So I know that The Pale Dreamer was released second, but reading it before reading The Bone Season I think was really, really key to just sort of understanding the backstory of these characters before jumping into the book. And then the book itself, again, had a lovely time with it. Let's talk core pile again. So for characters, the characters after their intro in The Pale Dreamer became so much more layered and so much more complex in this story. I like how characters such as our main character Paige was more confident in her abilities, but still wasn't aware of everything that she could accomplish, so there was an element of training in this. I liked that her relationship with the gang back home was more complicated. In The Pale Dreamer, it was just they were a mysterious gang, but they were like a family, whereas in this book it explored the sort of corruption of that gang a little bit more, which I really enjoyed, and how Jackson had an unhealthy amount of control over the people in the gang, and how they came into the gang was sort of questioned a bit more. Was it manipulation? Was it because he was trying to help them? I liked how that layer was peeled back. The character of Warden, obviously, who is the sort of main love interest in this story, is definitely a very complicated character because he is essentially her prison guard. He's essentially Paige's prison guard, so you're definitely positioned to sort of hate him at the beginning of the book, but I like how those little moments in the story are revealed that give more depth to his character, that give more backstory to him as potentially being on her side, being sympathetic towards her cause, and how they're sprinkled in with sort of more negative reveals about her life back in London. So it really positions her life back in London as the bad thing, and then almost her life with Warden, not necessarily in the prison, but with Warden's support, as more positive in comparison to the sort of family that she put together in London. Elements of the main character's character, so Paige's character, did remain consistent from the first book, or the Pale Dreamer. Like her naivety, like her innocence, like the fact that she wasn't fully aware of everything. But again, like I said, I love how she grew throughout this story, became more hardened, became more aware of her powers, and came out of it being still really loyal to the people around her, but a little bit more jaded because she'd been through this prison camp. As for atmosphere, that was definitely really helped by the fact that I listened to the audiobook for the majority of this read. The audiobook narrator had the most beautiful Irish accent, so it really made the main character feel a bit more real because the main character is Irish. Outside of that, the vibes and the danger of the prison camp were really, really strong. You definitely felt the constant, like, on the edge of your seat anxiety of what's going to happen next, who are they going to hurt next, because they made it really, really clear throughout the story that these people didn't matter to the refs, the sort of people in power. And I liked the sort of uprooting of this whole world that was definitely done in the bonus season. So in the Pale Dreamer, you're presented with a fairly simple sort of power structure. You've got the Scion on top, and then everyone underneath that is kind of under the control of the Scion, but then there are sort of factions, I guess, outside of that of clairvoyants who have created their own power structure, but they're still under the control of the Scion because the Scion can arrest and kill them. But now they're introducing the refs, who are like, seem to be above the Scion as well. It seemed to be this all-powerful being, seem to be this other species. So the atmosphere of confusion, I guess, of being completely thrown out, you definitely feel that right alongside Paige, which I like. For writing, it's YA writing, very clearly YA writing, very clearly YA elements like Chosen One, like hidden powers, like training montages, like, you know, bad boy, I guess, romance, or sort of conflicted, morally grey romance, but it's not immature, so I liked it. As for plot, this was really surprising from the get-go for me in this story, because I expected a lot of the plot to take place in London like it had in The Pale Dreamer, but it very, very quickly ventured onto this prison camp, and then very quickly became about building a world that was completely different to the one that was introduced in The Pale Dreamer. The power structure was completely different. I liked all the reveals that were made throughout, all the little tense moments, all the moments of anxiety with the characters where certain people are put in danger or killed, and I'm amazed obviously by Samantha Shannon's ability to make me connect with characters so quickly so that when something happens to them I feel the anxiety and the hurt. I really liked the way the romance was developed, as I said before, alongside that sort of reveals about the truth of Paige's life in London, so it made the romance look better and the life in London look worse, which I think was really, really, you know, a smart way to have those elements interact with each other. I don't think there was anything about this plot that was particularly surprising to me. The elements of the jailbreak were fairly predictable because you kind of know that they're not going to stay in this prison camp forever, but I have no idea where the story is going to go from here now that they're out. I have no idea how the romance is going to develop from here now that they're in two separate places. So yeah, I think this one wasn't particularly surprising, but I'm going to be surprised by whatever the Mime Order comes up with because I have no idea what to expect. As for intrigue, I think I was really helped by the fact that I listened to the audiobook basically the whole way through. This definitely, I think, booted me out of my reading slump, which I am so, so glad about because I got so much to read this weekend, and I just let myself sit and enjoy it, and I basically read it in one sitting. So intrigue was high. Logic, I think, was really, really good as well. The magic system and the world need to be explained a little bit more, I think, going into the rest of the book, or rest of the series, I should say, but I think that'll happen because they've sort of laid the formation, and now there are sort of more intricate elements that I'm expecting will go into more detail in the rest of the series. But from what I understand of it already, I think it's logical, it makes sense. There was nothing that kind of presented itself that was a bit random and kind of came out of nowhere, so I appreciated the logic in this story. The logic of the decisions the characters made was clear as well. Of course they were going to try and break out of the prison camp, and of course they were going to try and rebel against their captors, so 100% that made sense. And as for enjoyment, I really had a lovely, lovely time with this read. So yeah, 4 stars for both of the books that I read in this anticipation hesitation round, which is great. I love it when I anticipate 2 books and they're both amazing. So yeah, that is the end of this video. Do let me know down below if you've read any of these books, if you agree with my thoughts on them or not, or just what you're reading at the moment, loving it, hating it, all that kind of thing. Come and chat to me in the comments down below. I love talking to you guys and I do my best to reply to every single comment. I really, really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please do let me know by liking, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell all down below. It's a super, super easy way to help my channel grow, and I will see you lovely people in my next video. Bye!